Welcome back, everybody. This is not a Malazan video, as you probably already know. So before we start, I'm going to come back with Malazan stuff and Dust of Dreams, the rest of Dust of Dreams on Monday, but I felt like doing a bit of a break, and it's going to be a Viking break. So today I'm going to talk about The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne, and do first like a quick spoiler-free review before I go into like a full spoiler discussion. I'll totally take a swig of ale in between to mark the pause and put the timestamp down below so you can like switch off and then come back once you've read the book. Tomorrow I'm going to talk about another Viking book, one that I'm super excited about talking about, which is The Long Ships by Frans G. Bengtsson from Sweden, which is a classic of Viking adventure literature. And then on Saturday, probably I'll be talking a bit more about Viking stuff, and there might be mead involved. We'll see how that goes. Anyway, that's sort of the plan. So let's get this whole thing started. Skål. All right. So a lot of people have talked about the Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. Like all the big boys have reviewed it. Daniel Green has reviewed it. Mike on Mike's Book Reviews has reviewed it. Andy Smith has talked about it. Philip Chase, Dr. Philip Chase has talked about it. Everyone knows about this book at this point. I also read it. I really finished it a week ago, and then tried to do a video, and then that didn't work out. But don't worry. So let's get this whole thing started and talk about it in a non-spoilery way for a couple of minutes and explain what I thought about it and for whom I think this book is before I get into like some of the more critical things that I have to say about it. So first of all, I enjoyed it. It's fun to read, really. It's a lot of fun, and it has some seriously good bits in there. So even though I'll be more critical later on, overall I had a lot of fun reading it, and I'll totally go and read the next part whenever it comes out, right? It's also been my first contact with John Gwynne. I know a lot of people are like, go read The Faithful and the Fallen, it's amazing, and all of that, but Audible hates me and only allows me to buy the last part of that series. And that's why I haven't read The Faithful and the Fallen. And yeah, I'm not sure if I ever go back, and like if I ever get a chance I'll probably go and read it, but until the gods of licensing feel kindly disposed to me, I will not go there. So yeah, The Faithful and Fallen I haven't read. The other one I also haven't read. Maybe I'll go for that one because apparently I can buy that on Audible. Who knows? So The Shadow of the Gods was the first contact I had with John Gwynne. It's sort of Viking fantasy, which I appreciate because Vikings are fun in a way. And it's not a historical novel, it's a fantasy novel. It's just taking a lot of Viking influences. So basically our buddy John Gwynne is taking a book out of, taking a page out of the older Robert E. Howard book of how to write historical fiction without having to deal with all the nitpicking of historians, which is transplanted into like a different world, which Howard did with his Hyborian Age, and John Gwynne just makes up his own fantasy world to be all Viking-y about it, which is cool. He gives it a nice twist, which we're going to talk about later on, and still manages to put in a ton of details about like Viking culture, Norse culture as we know it right now, which is one of those things that is important to understand. All we know about Norse culture is just the current state of the art, or the current state of science. It's like we dig up something more, we'll find out more stuff about Vikings and how Vikings live, because our sources are not that good. But he does that, and he tells a competent story within that. It has three viewpoint characters. Two of those are female, which is Orca and Elvar. One of them is male, his name is Varg. And his world is basically a world that is similar to like Norse mythology, while retaining the historical details that we can tell about Viking life. So that's, pretty cool. The story he tells is straightforward. It has a few plot twists that are not executed too well, is my criticism there. Um, but it's a lot of fun to read. He's a very competent writer. The writing is like, as I said, like the descriptions are very detailed, very naturalistic, and it's a page turner, and that's fun. So that's sort of my spoiler free thing. So if you have like a liking for Viking things, you have ever like looked into Viking, like Norse mythology, at least in like some, way or other, whether it is, Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology, or actually went and read some of the sagas or whatever, or the Eddas, you're gonna enjoy this if you don't mind like excruciating detail when it comes to armor and other things that we know about Vikings from history and archaeology. If that's your thing, then yeah, go and read this book because it's fun to read. It's like it works. Um, so yeah, that's sort of where I stand on the Shadow of the Gods. I enjoyed it. It's sort of, I would call it blockbuster fantasy. It hits all the right buttons, but there's not going to be any big surprises. Now I'm going to take a sip. You're going to listen to whatever my neighbors are listening to, and then we're going to go into the spoiler discussion and my real criticism. All right. So, let's get into it. As I said, I enjoyed it. I mostly enjoy the world building. The world building is impressive. It's really good. I like the twists he puts on the world. My issues are all with plot development, correct character development, and all of that. So let's look into that. Now, if you've read Norse mythology, you know that like the big ending is obviously Ragnarok. The gods fight each other, and everyone basically dies except Balder, who has died before, and his blind brother Herder, and so forth. And then a new world grows out of that. And Gwyn goes and takes that. Goes and takes that and makes that reality. It's like the gods have fought, they killed each other, except the dragon, which, he calls Ligrifa, but I guess it's close to what we might call Nidhöggr in actual Norse mythology, who is just trapped underneath the the ash tree that is at the center of creation. We in Norse mythology would call Yggdrasil. He calls it a different name that I have forgotten. And even in Norse mythology, Nidhöggr, the dragon, is down there gnawing at the roots of Yggdrasil. So you have those like details. He switches names. He does all of that in a very elegant way, and I like that. I like that a lot. Also, the idea of having like physical proof of the fallen gods in this world after the fall, the big war of the gods. A Snakavik, that city of the serpent, which is close to Jörmungandr, but he mixes it up with, I guess, Odin in a way, as the creation. That's really cool. I like that. It's it's something that harkens back to the idea of the Norse creation myth, where Odin and some others kill Ymir, the frost giant, whom you find in Robert E. Howard, obviously, and build the world out of his flesh and all of that. That's pretty cool. It also reminded me of something that I guess it's super nerdy. There's a role playing game out there called The Day After Ragnarok by Ken Hite, which is something super fascinating, which has also like, I mean, it's pulp and weird, and I'm not going to go into details, but at some point in that, like, the background for that role playing game, pen and paper role playing game, I have to add, the Midgard serpent Jörmungandr is also killed and is now lying across the world, and you have that just reminded me of it, because that's, one of those things that, like, you have the city built in the skull of the world serpent, which is, really impressive and cool world building wise. And so yeah, having the idea of like the gods being basically dead, those gods being dead, and through their battle basically destroying the world, and what that leaves for the people, like the humans that survive it. That's a really cool approach. I really love that. Now, having all those gods being like having animal shapes is nice, and having all the people, not all the people, but having people that are sort of the children of those gods in a way, the ability to take on some aspect of those particular animals that are associated with those gods that they're like, descended from, is a nice thing. It has this role playing game, aspect of it. You can totally go and turn this entire setting into like a gaming property whenever you feel like it. I could probably, go down and write down of like a Dungeons and Dragons version of it if I wanted to. That's I don't mind that though. That's cool. And it's a unique way of looking at it. So as I said, the world building of this series, or this series soon to be series trilogy, is awesome. I respect that, and I enjoyed it reading it. Now we come to the things that I kind of have issues with. So the first thing there is probably something that where I'm maybe in a sort of special situation. And that is the Viking details. Now, I have known people who were big into like Viking reenactment, medieval reenactment, but mostly on the Norse reenactment. So I've known a lot of these terms that are flung about by John Gwynne in this book, right? He uses a lot of Norse words or pseudo-Norse words to describe armor, to describe weapons, to describe all these things. And that's cool. Like, I don't mind mentioning that woolen cap that people put under their helmets and stuff like that is made by null binding. Although he never explains how null binding works, but it's a thing. But I've heard the word null binding so many times before that having Gwynne mention it, like every time someone puts on a woolen piece of garment, it's mentioned that it was made by null binding and not by knitting, becomes redundant. Same goes for other pieces of clothing where it's explicitly mentioned every single time that it's tablet weave or herringbone or whatever, depending on those things. And like, yes, I know those things are super important for people who do reenactment these days, but reading it becomes extremely repetitive at some point. Which brings me to like another thing that I'm going to go into after I have another sip of ale. And this is the entire, like a large part, like a significant part of the book is taken up by very detailed descriptions of everyday life, which, once again, why not? But they become like very much a thing that you could totally cut down if you wanted to, because nothing really happens. There's no character development in there. There's no plot development in there. Nothing like that happens. It's just like the author indulging himself in describing how to fight with spear and shield, which in a training montage basically, which yeah, why not? But why do we have to have that in like 3 different chapters, in like different like parts of it? And is that really necessary? And so that's like another thing in there. It's like this takes up a lot of pages, and it's something that you have a lot in there. It's like fighting scenes are described in minute detail. Landscapes are described in minute detail in a very like hard realistic way, which on the other hand kind of counterbalances the idea that this is fantasy. If this were like a hardcore realistic historical novel, I would still complain, but it kind of counterbalances or sets off the idea of it being fantasy. And at some point, I was just thinking, like, we could probably have saved like 50 pages by cutting down on the actual detail of how to do, how to wear your armor, how to do all these things. Also, is it really necessary to call like a chainmail shirt a brinja every time? Because bringa, whatever I don't know the pronunciation, but it's like, I figured it out. But is it important to put all of those things in every single time, to use these Norse words in there every time? It's like, does it really add that much to our sense of immersion to do that? Or does it come across more as like the author trying to appear as really knowledgeable about Viking things? Which, once again, these are not Vikings. These are fantasy people in a fantasy world that is just like very Viking-y in a way. So that's something that I have an issue with, in a way. The next thing, the plot is extremely predictable. It's like, we see that guy Varg, one of our we have Varg, one of our viewpoint characters, and he walks into that city and he wants to find a sorcerer, witch, or magician, or whatever you want to call him in this case, to do something for him. And he finds out that the only one they have, the only one he can reach, is working for this mercenary company. And you just know he's gonna end up in that mercenary company. It's not like a big thing. You just know in advance that this is how it's gonna end up, right? It's like a similar thing with Orca and her husband. It's like, once they after the first thing, when they figure out, when they come to that burnt down steading, and the child has been taken away, and then they hear about that there's more children being taken away, you just know that their son Brekka is going to be abducted as well. You just know, right? It's not a surprise. Same as with Elvar. It's like, once they sail into Snakavik, or even before, once they know that they're going there, you know that she has some relationship to the Jarl, the king in this case, of that city. It's there's no plot twists in there that you can't really predict. And the biggest one I felt is once it's established that we have people that are have aspects of the wolf god, and you have people that have aspects of the bear god, and all of these things, right? Which is cool. And then you call your main character, one of your viewpoint characters, Varg. It's like, I'm sorry, it's like, once it has been established that there are these wolf-born people, it's like, once he finally finds out in the last third, quarter of the book, even later, that he is also wolf-born, it's like, I'm sorry. And you don't even need to know Scandinavian languages. As soon as you have ever read Tolkien once, you make that wolf connection with the word Varg, right? And I'm like, is that really necessary? Isn't it a big obvious? Which, is what I meant when I said that plot and character development is not the best in this book. It's like, I do enjoy it. I have fun with it, but that's about it. It could have been handled better. All right, I'm back. I'm sorry for the bad cut that I'm totally gonna make here. I just had to run and go do some stuff because this video is apparently cursed by those gods. But I took the opportunity to refill the horn, so that's a thing. All right, as I said, the plot developments are not exactly surprising. They're not the main focus. I would say not the main focus, and this is sort of what I mean when I said they're not, anything that you can't predict if you have read a bunch of fantasy stories before. And the same goes for the characters. You kind of know where these things are going. You can see all the developments coming chapters away, which is something that I would hold against the story. I would just say that it is kind of set off by John Gwynne's clear skill with words and his enthusiasm. Like you feel like he really likes his world. He really likes his characters, and he really enjoys like talking about Viking stuff. Right? He really loves that. I just feel that it is sometimes not getting the balance right between absolute like authenticity that you can't have by definition in a fantasy book, because that's not what you go for in a fantasy story. If you want to go like all realism, you need to be aware of the fact that yes, we don't know enough about these things. We can, we can build off what we know right now, but we have to be aware, be like clear that this is just what we think how Vikings or Norse people lived, how they worked and so forth. Because one of those big things there is that we have very little written evidence. Like, I mean, yeah, you can go and read Snorri Sturluson or whatever, but he's already a Christian, right? There's very little actual written evidence or like written sources on how Viking life works. It's a lot of it is assumption. So going into fantasy is pretty cool and is like the easiest way to deal with this. I just feel the problem with going super realistic in these details is that it can, you know, make things seem more real or more trustworthy in a way than they really are. So being aware of the fact that it is all fantasy is vitally important. Also, as I said before, like the problem is that the writing is super detailed, and that can be boring if you're not interested in like Viking fighting and all these details, which can like detract from it still being a very competently written, straightforward fantasy story. And I know I probably come across as super arrogant or whatever. As I said before, I enjoyed this. It's just not, anything that would have like has the power to move me in like a big way, which is something that I personally really appreciate in literature these days. But I can see, like my 15-year-old self would totally have loved this, thought this the best book ever written. Nowadays, I would say it's entertaining. It's a well done, competently done book, but it's more craft than art, is what I try to say here. And I hope I'm not gonna insult John Gwynne here, because I don't want to do that. As I said, I enjoy this because there's a room in my heart for this kind of thing. It's like I go down, I go there, I sit there, I read this book, and I have fun for like 3 days, and then I'm like, all right, that's that. Now I go and read something else. It's not, I read this and then I go like, oh shit, I need to think about this for the next couple of weeks. And I feel that in these days where we have enough to think about all the time, it's great to have something like The Shadow of the Gods. I just also feel that it's important that we know what we're getting ourselves into when we read books like this. We don't do not expect revelations or big reveals or anything that can't be predicted by anyone who has had like a decent background in fantasy reading, not even in mythology. I just feel like I guess, and this is sort of like my final thoughts on it, the fact that the world building and the idea of that world of like looking after the fall of the gods and how do we deal with that, and doesn't that wouldn't it make people super angry to have the gods do their like dumb god thing and destroy half the world? And I love that premise. I absolutely love it to death. And I'm just a bit disappointed that like the rest doesn't hold up to that great world building, that great like premise, and is just like more of a pedestrian execution after that. Like, as I said, it's not a bad plot. It's just not super original. It's not like the characters aren't cool. And I appreciate the fact that out of three characters in a Viking world, we have two women, and we have two female characters, and both of those are badass fighters. Which, once again, when you look at like older Viking-y, Norse, whatever pseudo medieval fantasy is also cool. It's like, yeah, I appreciate all of those things. I just wish that the characters would have been more original, and I'm just seriously pissed off by the fact that Varg turns out to be a wolf. Touched, because come on. We all knew that before, and it couldn't have been like slightly more original. I don't know. But all in all, I feel it's a book. I'm glad I read it. I'm slightly sad that I can't get, like, I mean, I would have loved to read The Faithful and the Fallen, but I can't right now. So I don't know where to go from here on out with this, but I'm certainly picking up the next Bloodsworn book whenever it comes out. That's sort of where I'll leave it for today. Tomorrow I'm going to talk about another Viking book, and then we'll see where things go from there. Until then, Skål.